Start up week 16, number 1 says, write the tangent ratio for angle P and angle Q. Anytime that you are dealing with any type of trig function, sine, cosine, or tangent, you need to always start out by saying SOHCAHTOA. That means sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. So when we're talking about tangent then we're going to have that the tangent of theta, or tangent of some random angle, equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. And since we're talking about tangent of P first, we will have the tangent of P equals, in reference to angle P, its opposite side is 9, its adjacent side is 12. So we have the fraction of 9 over 12. Anytime you're writing a trig function, if it can reduce, you want to reduce it. Therefore, the tangent of P would reduce to 3 over 4. So that is the first part of question number 1. The second part to question number 1 asks for the tangent of Q. So now we're looking at the tangent of Q. We're still dealing with tangent. So tangent of Q is still opposite over adjacent. But we change our orientation or our perspective, however you want to look at it. Since I am looking from angle Q and looking across, that is now my opposite side. My adjacent side is 9. So if I can reduce, then I can reduce. Now, some of you always get caught up in the fact of adjacent. Well, why is 15 not adjacent? The simple fact of the matter is that any angle opposite the right angle is always the hypotenuse. So it is never considered an adjacent side. Let's move to number 2. It says find the value of x to the nearest degree. Well, I'm looking at angle x right here. So always when I am given an angle, or I'm looking to solve for an angle, I take what I am given. In reference to that angle, I have the opposite side. Also in reference to that angle, I have the adjacent side. Going back to my SOHCAHTOA, I have opposite and adjacent. So therefore, I will be using the tangent function. Tangent of x equals opposite over adjacent, which would be 6 over 5. Now, I must solve this equation for x. In order to get x by itself, I must move tangent across. Anytime I move tangent across the equal sign, it becomes the inverse. Because we cannot divide by tangent. That is explained in a video. So, how do we put this in our calculator? We would say second tan 6 divided by 5. And the reason why we are doing second tan is because if you look above your button on your calculator, or this is what a button on a calculator looks like, tan, and then in little bitty different colored letters right above it, it says inverse tan. So that's the reason why we're using the inverse. We are looking for an angle measure. Anytime you are looking for an angle measure, you will be using the inverse function, whether if it's sine, cosine, or tangent. Now, if you are not using my graphing calculator, you may have to go the 6 divided by 5 equals to get that decimal number, then go second tan. If your calculator does order of operation, however, this is the way that you need to put it in the calculator. If it does not do order of operation, you need to divide 6 divided by 5 equals, and get 1 point whatever, then go second tan. So when we put that in the calculator, second tan, 6 divided by 5, we get 50.19. Anytime we are using a degree, we always round to the nearest whole degree. 50 degrees would be our solution. Let's look at number 3. Find the value of x, round to the nearest tenth. Once again, take what we're given. Here is the angle that I am given. Always, this side right here is opposite. Notice we do not have a value for that side. I have the adjacent and I have the hypotenuse. You need to get in the habit of not having to write this every time. SOHCAHTOA, you've got to know that. If you can't spell SOHCAHTOA, some old hippie caught another hippie tripping on acid. However crazy it may sound, you're going to remember it. I don't care. Whatever works. So what do we have? We have the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So that means we will be working with the cosine. I can't spell. Cosine of 40 degrees equals the adjacent over x. Couple of rules of thumb. If you're looking for an angle measure, you're going to be using the inverse. If your x is in the denominator, if the x is in the denominator, this is a proportion. We cross multiply these, or we can simply just replace them to where 14 is now divided by the cosine of 40. We'd put that in our calculator. 14 divided by cosine 40, enter. There is a cosine button. It's COS. There's a sine button. Y'all call it sin. It's sine. So 14 divided by the cosine of 40, that gives me 18.3, rounded to the nearest tenth. Side measures are rounded to the nearest tenth. Angle measures are rounded to the nearest whole number. If you're looking for an angle measure, you will use the inverse function. If your x is in the denominator, you will end up dividing.
I don't get what button to press.
Number 4. Here's my angle. I have the opposite side. I have the hypotenuse. That is sine 35 degrees equals opposite, which is x, hypotenuse 16. Now, we've already discussed, if we're looking for an angle measure, we're going to use inverse. If x is in the denominator, we will divide. If x is the numerator, we simply only have to multiply sine 35 times 16. Now, if you're writing this out, the 16 would need to be in front. If you are putting it in your calculator, the 16 would need to be in front. That way you have the less chance of making a mistake of actually multiplying 35 times 16 before you take the sign of it. If you do that, you will get an incorrect answer. Always put the numerical number, not the angle, in front. So we will say 16 times the sine of 35 degrees. And a decimal approximation of 9.2 is our answer. Number 5. Find the value of x. Round to the nearest degree. Now, here is my angle. Always across from it is the opposite side. We do not have that side. I have the adjacent and I have the hypotenuse. That means that we will be dealing with the cosine of x is 8 over 13. Remember, if you are looking for an angle measure, you will take the inverse function of your fraction. So we'll say inverse cosine, so second cosine 8 divided by 13 gives us x is approximately 52 degrees.
I'm confused with the little inverse.
Is it special right triangle or
Number 6, anytime that you are asked to solve and it says to leave in simplest radical form, that should be a clue to use Pythagorean theorem, or it's a special right triangle. Because we don't use sine, cosine, and tangent for special or for a simplest radical form. Now, what is this? This is a 30-degree angle. So that means that this is a 30, 60, 90 triangle. We have 3 parts. We have the short side, which is always opposite the 30-degree angle. We have the long side, or long leg, which is adjacent to 30 degree, or would be opposite of 60. And of course, we always have the hypotenuse. Now, why is that so special? If I have the short leg, which I do in this case, the long leg is always the short times radical 3. Shortcut, special right triangles. If I have the short leg, the hypotenuse is always 2 times the short. So in this case, short equals 19. Therefore, the long would be 19 radical 3, and the hypotenuse would be 38. That's all I have to do. Now let's take some time. What if I was not given the short? Then that means if I were given the long, to find the short, I would say the long divided by radical 3, go through my properties of rationalization, and then solve. And if I was given the hypotenuse, if I was given the hypotenuse to find the short, the hypotenuse divided by 2 gives me the short side. I always want to find the short side first and then find my other sides, because all of my other formulas are in reference to the short side. Now, while we're here, let's talk about 45, 45, 90 real quick. Because number 6 will be a mix and match. 45, 45, 90. Meaning that all this week you could have a 45, 45, 90 or a 30, 60, 90 problem. 45, 45, 90 is an isosceles right triangle. That means that you have 2 legs that are the same measure, and then you have the hypotenuse. If you are given the leg, we'll say that the leg is equal to 5 units here. If you're only given one leg, and this is x right here, and this is y, well, I know without a doubt that x equals 5, because it is isosceles. Now, how do I find the hypotenuse? If you are given the leg, the hypotenuse equals the leg times radical 2. So in this case, y would equal 5 radical 2. If, on the other hand, you by some chance were given what the hypotenuse was, let's change the problem and say that the hypotenuse is now equal to 8. We want to find x. In order to find x, I'm given the hypotenuse. The leg will equal the hypotenuse divided by radical 2. So we have to go through our properties of rationalization. So I'm going to say 8 divided by radical 2. I have to rationalize. That means multiply both the top and the bottom by radical 2. And multiply straight across. So I have 8 radical 2 over radical 4. Reduce that. And the square root of 4 is 2. And notice that we can reduce the 8 and the 2 there. So what does that give us as a solution? 4 radical 2. And that's the way that we would find the leg if given the hypotenuse. And that is your startup for week number 16.